Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us to the technical session on exploring opportunities to integrate tourism into nationally determined contribution NDCs in the Caribbean region. My name is Roxana Ashtari. I am a senior project specialist at UN Tourism, Sustainable Tourism and Resilience Department. And we are very excited to be here with you, with other colleagues from other organizations. We will start the session with the welcome remarks from our executive director. She has sent her gratitude and also appreciation for all of you joining today, but she had another meeting that she couldn't join. So she has sent a video message that shortly we will listen to. Later on, we will have a feature address from Ms. Donna Regis Prosper. She is a Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. And later on, we are honored to have Ms. Gunay Baramayova, Head of Tourism Unit, State Tourism Agency of Azerbaijan. And later on, we will carry on with the technical presentation. We will start from colleagues from UN Tourism, Ms. Virginia Fernandez-Trapa. She's the program coordinator at the Sustainable Tourism and Resilience. And then later we will continue with the introduction to the nationally determined contribution presented by colleagues from RCC Caribbean, UNFCCC, Mr. Jason Williams. And then later it will be followed by Patrick Munyaneza, the regional expert on Article 6 of Paris Agreement. Just to ensure that we are having a smooth session, we would like to remind you, please mute yourself while we are having the session. And later on, we will have an interactive session that you are all encouraged and welcome to intervene. And during that, we would ask you to turn on your camera and also unmute yourself. Please also observe the time allocated to the intervention, as we would like to take the most out of it and would like to hear all the voices equally. And just for all of us to know who is today with us, we invite you to rename yourself to appear as the country and then your name. So by looking at the screen, we know who is speaking. And also before the intervention, also it would be great if you could introduce yourself. Just for you to know, the parts that it's the intervention from each country, it's for internal purposes only. It wouldn't be published. And the parts of the presentation which are being recorded, it will be disseminated later on. And if you have any comments and concern later on, you can communicate to us after the session. So with any further ado, I would like to share with you the message from the Executive Director, Ms. Zorica Oresevic, who would like to be here with us today, but unfortunately she couldn't.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives from the tourism authorities of the Caribbean region, good morning. And thank you for joining us in today's important session. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this event organized by the World Tourism Organization in collaboration with the Caribbean Tourism Organization and with the valued support of UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for the Caribbean. Today, we are gathered to explore the unique and timely opportunity to integrate tourism into nationally determined contributions NDCs in a nationally determined manner with a focus on the Caribbean region. This session will provide insights into the process and the next cycle of NDCs, as long with an understanding of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which enables voluntary cooperation towards the achievements of NDCs. We are meeting at a pivotal moment. For the first time, the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference, COP29, will feature a dedicated tourism thematic day on its action agenda. This recognition of tourism as a key sector for climate action marks a historic milestone. It underscores the crucial role our sector plays not only as a driver of global economies, but also as a contributor to global climate solutions. As we emerge from the unprecedented challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, our sector has shown remarkable resilience and adaptability. Now, as we face the escalating impacts of climate change, we must channel that same resilience into aligning tourism's recovery with a low-carbon, sustainable future. At COP29, the Baku Declaration for Enhanced Climate Action in Tourism will be put forward, serving as a powerful call to action. Tourism is the lifeblood of the Caribbean, driving economic growth and society and supporting millions of livelihoods. Yet, the region's natural beauty and biodiversity, the very things that attract too many visitors, make it particularly vulnerable. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and coral bleaching directly threaten the tourism sector. By enhancing climate action in tourism, we can take proactive steps to safeguard these natural assets, strengthen resilience, and ensure tourism continues to benefit local community and national economies alike. Today's session is designed to provide actionable insights into how tourism can contribute to each country's unique climate commitments. We look forward to the ideas, experiences, and collaborative spirit you bring to this session. Our hope is that together we can drive forward a vision for a Caribbean tourism that is not only sustainable but also successful. Let us seize these opportunities to strengthen our sector's role in climate action and set tourism as a model of resilience in the face of global challenges. I thank you and wish you all a very productive session.
So we just listened to the Executive Director, Ms. Orusevich, and I think it's a very strong message for all of us today and just encouragement that we are on the right path and we really count on all of you. So I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Donna Regis Prosper, the Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. Mrs. Prosper, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Roxana. Good morning, everyone. Before I start my address, I would like to just indicate that I am currently on mission. I'm in a beautiful island called St. Martin, and there's some noise in the background. I guarantee you that I'm not on vacation, but it's just some noise that's in the background that you may hear some feedback. So I just wanted everybody to know that. Thank you so much for first and foremost partnering with us on behalf of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. We are indeed honored to do this very, very important session in collaboration with you and your teams. So it is certainly, as I indicated, it's certainly a pleasure to be with you, even though virtually at this technical working session focused on nationally determined contributions. Together, we have a unique opportunity to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time, which is climate change. As you know, the Paris Agreement represents a global commitment to limit warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. This agreement is not just a document, it's a call to action for all of us. Each country has a role to play. This is a collective effort, and today we gather to reaffirm this commitment. Nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, are critical as they outline how each nation intends to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate impacts. They reflect our national priorities and circumstances. For many countries, particularly for us, small island developing states like those in the Caribbean, these contributions are not just about environmental policy. They are about our survival. As we develop and refine our NDCs, we must recognize the unique challenges we face. Our geographical isolations makes us particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. As you heard earlier, from rising sea levels to increasingly severe weather events, these consequences of inactions are glaring, and it is time to act now. In the Caribbean, our economies often depend on sectors such as tourism and agriculture, both of which are highly sensitive to climate fluctuations. The impact of climate change can be devastating, affecting not only our natural resources, but also our livelihoods of countless individuals and families. These vulnerabilities underscores the need for a focused approach to our carbon footprint. We must ask ourselves, how could we lead the way in reducing emissions while fostering sustainable development? How can we leverage our unique strengths and innovations to build resilience? Collaboration will be key as we move forward. By sharing best practices, leveraging technology, and supporting one another, we can enhance the effectiveness of our NDCs. Regional collaboration can provide the necessary tools and resources to achieve our goals. We have the knowledge and the capacity to create impactful change, but it requires a united effort. As we look ahead to COP29, we must approach this gathering with renewed energy and purpose. It will be a platform for us to showcase our commitments, share our progress, and call for increased ambitions. Let's ensure that our voices are heard, emphasizing the specific needs and challenges faced by Caribbean nations. Furthermore, we must emphasize the importance of education and public awareness. As we discuss technical aspects, let us not forget the broader community. Engaging our citizens in climate action can amplify our efforts. We need to foster a culture of sustainability where every individual understands their role in combating climate change. As we navigate this crucial moment, let us remember that our NDCs are living documents. They should evolve as our understanding of climate science grows and as we gain insights from our experiences. It is essential to monitor our progress, celebrate our achievements, and recalibrate our efforts as needed. Let us also remain committed to the principles of equality and justice. The most vulnerable among us often bear the brunt of climate impacts, and our responses must reflect our shared responsibilities to support those in need. In conclusion, I urge you to embrace this opportunity to reflect our commitments under the Paris Agreement and the significance of our NDCs. Together, we can chart a course towards a sustainable future, not just for ourselves, but the generations to come. As we prepare for COP29, let us collaboratively, innovatively, and passionately work together. The time for action is now. Thank you very much for your commitment and dedication to this vital cause. I look forward to the fruitful discussions ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presence here actually today, and also the support from the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and also the strong message that you are sharing with us today, which is very important for all of us to hear it and also know that we have the full support on that. So I would like to give the floor to Ms. Gunay Baraimova, Head of Tourism Unit State of State Tourism Agency of Azerbaijan. Please, Gunay, the floor is yours.
Hello, good day to everyone. It's a great honor to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to have this very important speech on the COP29 tourism initiative. As I said, it's very important to discuss the vital role that tourism can play in advancing climate action. As we gather to explore opportunities for integrating tourism into NDCs, it's important to acknowledge both opportunities and challenges we face in aligning tourism with our climate goals. Tourism, as we all know, is a powerful driver of economic growth and development. However, it's also a significant contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions and one of the sectors most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The cross-cutting nature of tourism means that it holds immense potential to contribute to climate solutions, making sustainability a cornerstone of national tourism strategies. Azerbaijan, as the presidency of COP29, is fully committed to fostering holistic climate solutions within the sector. Sustainability is already a key pillar of our national tourism strategy, and through COP29, we aim to bring countries and stakeholders together to further integrate tourism into national climate policies. The Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action and Tourism, launched at COP26, marked a milestone in positioning tourism within global climate action. Building on this, COP29 will host the first ever dedicated tourism day on November 20th, which we believe is for tourism climate action. Together with UN Tourism, we will work to enhance the positioning of tourism as a sectoral policy that supports national climate goals. One of the key outcomes of Tourism Day, as was already mentioned, will be the first ever ministerial meeting and the launch of COP29 Declaration on Enhanced Climate Action in Tourism. This declaration will underline the urgent need for accelerated climate action within the sector. It commits industries to promoting sustainable tourism practices by reducing emissions and increasing resilience. Most importantly, it calls for governments to integrate tourism into national climate policy documents such as NDCs. In addition to the declaration, Tourism Day will offer a platform for in-depth discussions on critical issues such as implementing science-based methods for measuring greenhouse gas emissions in tourism. This remains one of the biggest challenges to tourism's decarbonization. Through global cooperation, COP29 aims to foster coherence and synergy in measurement methodologies, ensuring the sector can effectively contribute to climate action. We will also focus on ecosystem resilience, regeneration, and innovative financial strategies. This comprehensive approach will not only address tourism's environmental impact, but also elevate its role as a solution to the climate crisis. In a nutshell, at COP29, we aim to strengthen tourism's role in national climate strategies and NDC updates, increase commitment from national tourism entities for climate action through mechanisms like the Glasgow Declaration, implement science-based frameworks for actively measuring tourism's environmental impact, establish a global coordination mechanism to drive collective climate initiatives, and showcase best practices for decarbonization and ecosystem regeneration. I must emphasize that we have a unique opportunity to stimulate real policy change and enhance ambition through this initiative. Our goal is to support tourism's integration into climate strategies, ensuring the sector contributes to generalization efforts in a meaningful way. I urge all of you to join us on this journey and endorse the COP29 declaration, which has already been sent to all UNFCCC focal points across the globe. Together, we can ensure that tourism contributes to a more sustainable and resilient world. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to working with all of you to achieve these goals.
Gunay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to have you. We all know that how busy you are, how much work you have been doing recently, and more to come. And it's very precious, your presence here for us, and also your strong message. We are very excited to have the climate action in tourism as part of the UN Climate Change COP29 action agenda under the presidency of Azerbaijan. And shortly, we will listen more on what is coming up. So I would like to share the floor with my very dear colleague, Virginia Fernandez-Trapa, the Program Coordinator at Sustainable Tourism and Resilience Department here at UN Tourism. Dear Virginia, the floor is yours, and very great to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Roxana. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to start by thanking our partners, Caribbean Tourism Organization, the Regional Collaboration Center of UNFCCC for their support, and of course, joining everyone in thanking the State Tourism Agency of the Republic of Azerbaijan for being here, and also for the support provided for our sector to achieve such milestone, COP29, having tourism in the climate agenda for the first time after 28 COPs, finally in COP29. The efforts are recognized. We are as you can imagine, absolutely thrilled about this. I cannot see the slides. Sorry, are they coming up? Okay, sorry. We are absolutely thrilled about the inclusion, and as Gunay said, we will be there celebrating on 20th of November. If anyone is interested to come, make a sign, we will be happy to send you an invitation. And Gunay already mentioned the Baku Declaration. This is a declaration led by the Action Agenda team of COP29, which basically, let's say, elevates the recognition of our efforts to a higher level. We are being seen by climate policymakers as a sector that is interesting to bring on board as part of the solution. And the declaration is basically calling for two main things. So first, also as Gunay was saying, considering or exploring the inclusion of tourism in the next set of nationally determined contributions. The nationally determined contributions are undergoing review as we speak, because governments need to submit updated versions every 5 years, and it happens to be next year when the next round is due. And also the declaration, Baku Declaration, is calling for enhancing climate action integration in tourism policies. But where are we coming from? So basically, we are coming from, next slide, please, a series, I would say, of achievements that have led us to this precise moment. For example, the UN system, when discussing climate action and the priorities for COP29 and COP30, also included for the first time in a document that is called Common Messages of the UN System, included for the first time sectors like tourism. What you see on the screen is, let's say, a standard paragraph of the major sectors that are normally, considered when talking about climate or climate negotiations. Now you can see in the last line that our sector is mentioned when appropriate to be considered as part of an important element of the industry in many countries. Next, please. A little bit earlier than those COP messages, the 2023 synthesis report of the Global Stocktake. The Global Stocktake is an exercise carried out by UNFCCC every 5 years, where they, as the name says, take stock of what's going on in terms of climate action by countries, by a variety of stakeholders. And in the Stocktake they carried out in 2023, the synthesis report already identified interesting elements for tourism. As you can see, basically the report is calling on response measures to be broader. It's mentioning tourism as part of that needed to broaden approach, and it's also encouraging, a transition to sustainable tourism. So again, another step in the ladder here that we are advancing on. Next, please. And obviously, earlier on in 2021, COP26, we had launched the Glasgow Declaration in tourism, which is called a declaration, but actually right now it's an initiative. It's basically a global climate action initiative that is building on a shared vision that is explained in the Glasgow Declaration, and that operates as a voluntary commitment. So basically those that subscribe it have to commit to the following elements that you see on the screen. First of all, commit to support the global goals set by the Paris Agreement, to outline how they are planning to support those global goals in a climate action plan that will be developed within 12 months, to align those plans with 5 pathways, the strategic pathways: measure, decarbonize, regenerate, collaborate, and finance, and also to report on an annual basis, not only for transparency and accountability purposes, but because it's the only way to share progress among each other and, be able to export and replicate the learnings. Obviously, when we think about developing climate plans, and we're talking about potentially a national tourism administration considering to become a signatory, for example, Antigua and Barbuda is a signatory since last May, when we hosted together an event at SIDS4. So question that comes to mind of an NTA when signing is, what is a climate action plan for me? And ultimately the goal is the same goal that Baku Declaration is proposing, that climate action is integrated in tourism strategy and policy. So the only thing is that given to, let's say, policy cycles, we may not be at the right time of the policy cycle when we sign the Glasgow Declaration to go ahead and do or revise a tourism strategy or policy. That's why the tool of the action plan can enable already to enact some climate action activities while, you know, the policy cycle comes into review again, and we can integrate it in the next policy round. We have 850 signatories, 15 countries or 15 signatories at national level, both from a National Tourism Administration and National Tourism Organization. And of course, we know we ask for a lot, but we also try to provide as much assistance as possible to our signatories, accompanying them in the process of implementing their commitments through capacity building or tools and resources that we developed. Next, please. I mean, one of the things that we do as part of the implementation of Glasgow Declaration, as I said, is try and support our national tourism administrations and national tourism organizations, which have become signatories, to integrate climate action in their activities. Why? Well, I don't think I need to convince anybody of the importance of addressing climate change. It is accelerating. It is affecting us all. Our sector is very vulnerable, and tourism is a contributor of emissions. Climate policy is being implemented anyway because our governments are signatories of the Paris Agreement, and it's going to affect tourism either now or later. So it's good to take action already and be proactive as a sector. And in addition, we believe that really having good climate policy for tourism is increasing the competitiveness of our sector, its sustainability, and its resilience. So what's the status now? Next slide, please. I mean, we have been integrated as a sector in climate policy to a certain extent. You know, we carried out a review of all the existing NDCs, nationally determined contributions, in 2022, and 53%, so a little bit more than half, already make reference to our sector as a vulnerable sector to the impacts of climate change. That is the main reference that we see, which of course we all agree to. And then there are 34% of the NDCs which also are connecting tourism with adaptation measures, and 19% that also relate tourism with mitigation measures. Now, what we see in general is that these references are generally broad and not necessarily encompassing, you know, the tools or references to the tools or the instruments that we, as a National Tourism Administration, would need to push them forward. So part of the exercise we're trying to do today is reflect with you on what opportunities we could identify to push this link to become stronger, taking advantage of you know, the fact that the NDCs are under review. We're also mentioned in national adaptation plans, and of course, as you all know, in cross-sectoral policies that may have co-benefits for tourism, like for instance, in relation with renewable energy or in relation with sustainable transport, biodiversity protection, and others. But let's take now a deep dive into the NDCs of the Caribbean. I would like to invite my colleague, Livia Westhest. She's intern with us here in Sustainable Tourism and Resilience Department. And I'd like to invite her to share with us the results of a deep dive that she was helping us carry out with regards to the NDCs of the Caribbean region. Livia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Virginia. I would like to take you all along the NDC review we have pursued in the last few weeks as preparation for this webinar. And to give you an idea of what we did, we first looked at all NDC documents of the 16 countries that you can see on the slide here. We reviewed 2 submissions of the NDCs of each country, and we looked at both the submission of 2015 and 2020. And in these documents, we looked for keywords such as tourism or tourist, and we counted the number of times that these words were mentioned, and we revised the content of these tourism mentions. And what we noticed is a positive trend, and is in most cases the second submission had much more tourism mentions than the first submission. And for all first NDC submissions combined, we calculated a total of 79 tourism mentions, while in the second submission we found 244 tourism mentions. And next slide, please. Thank you. And to give you an idea of the current NDCs in effect, we created this overview of the 16 NDCs. We saw that 14 NDCs actually mentioned tourism. And in particular, these 14 looked at tourism from a vulnerability point of view. In addition, we saw that 12 NDCs also mentioned tourism in connection with adaptation, and 6 NDCs mentioned tourism in connection with mitigation measures. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then to give you an idea of some examples of how tourism was mentioned in these NDCs, we created these 6 key points. So firstly, what we saw was that in various NDCs, the tourism was mentioned in the national adaptation plans. So what they did in national adaptation plans is that they mentioned tourism as a priority sector. Secondly, what we saw in 2 NDCs was that they created next to the national adaptation plan one specific strategy for the tourism sector. And thirdly, what we saw was the involvement of tourism stakeholders. Various NDCs included representatives of the tourism sector in the stakeholder discussions when they prepared their second submission of the NDCs. Another thing we saw in multiple NDCs was the creation of clear overviews, for example, in tables, where they would portray specific goals for the tourism sector and where they also included actions on how to achieve these goals. And then another interesting way in which tourism was mentioned in the NDCs was through the inclusion of mitigation measures. Some examples that we saw were the increased usage of renewable energy in the tourism sector. Another NDC showed that they were looking at energy efficiency programs for hotels. And also another NDC looked into waste reduction strategies for the tourism sector specifically. And lastly, I would want to highlight that some NDCs included adaptation measures in the tourism sector. What we saw is that some NDCs introduced schemes for environmental management of beaches and restoration of mangroves and corals. And another interesting example is the introduction of climate-related insurances for tourism workers in the event of extreme weather events due to climate change, such as heavy rainfalls or heavy winds. Yes, so this was a short overview. I would now like to give the word back to my colleague Virginia.
Thank you so much, Livia. Very, very useful. I mean, in addition to this presentation, I trust that you all received a little summary explaining what your NDC contains and not when it comes to tourism. So I hope that was useful for you to get an idea of, you know, what's the status, and already maybe start the brainstorming internally of things that could be, you know, proposed from your end to this process. Please note that the NDCs, as per their name, are nationally determined. So at the end of the day, it's the country's prerogative to define what is included and what not. But we know that you all are doing a lot, and that's why we wanted to encourage you, you know, to look at this process as something strategic for our sector, and where maybe already you can build on those references that are included in the past submission of the NDC to make them more specific, to showcase progress of things you have done, to call for support for things that are needed. Next slide, please. So just wanting to give you a little bit of tools. We will not go into much details, but also as part of our work under the Glasgow Declaration, and in this case with technical support from UNEP and also support from UNFCCC for the release earlier in the year, we published a policy guidance to support climate action by national tourism administrations. What this guidance explains is basically where we sit as a sector in terms of climate policy at a national level, which are the levers that we can, use to develop climate action in tourism. For example, we can foster cross-governmental integration, or we can develop tourism strategies that are actually supporting the national climate goal. We can think about climate-aware tourism promotion, taking into account that, of course, promotion and marketing for destination positioning is a very important area of work of our ministries of tourism. We can promote partnerships and finance. And on the screen, you see basically a snapshot of the policy instruments that could, be, let's say, tweaked or put at the service of climate action. Some of them you would already have, but need to be refined to focus on climate. Some of them you maybe don't have, but maybe it's a discussion that you have ongoing or not. They range from strategies. We all have tourism strategies. The question is whether they are strong enough already or not in terms of climate action, or we can think about enhancing them. Perhaps the NDC process can also support us do this. Regulation, maybe not necessarily going to come from Ministry of Tourism, but we need to be aware. We need to find the synergies with regulation that is maybe in the pipeline in our country. What economic levers are there? Is my country thinking about, incentives for climate action, or is it thinking about taxation? Where and how can we turn this into an opportunity for tourism sector, to benefit from those incentives? What information do we have? Do we have data on who's implementing climate action in our sector? Do we have committed hoteliers, not so committed? Can we bring the private sector on board of the NDC implementation process? Because that's something where our sector is uniquely positioned. And other voluntary, activities and also education. So I recommend that you would maybe have a chance to take a look at this guidance, and let's now move into the next presentation of today, because of course you have learned about the status, where do we stand as a sector in terms of mentions in the NDC or not, but do we know what we mean when we talk about NDC process? Well, we are very lucky because our colleague Jason Williams is going to give us a very good introduction. So we are up to speed on what the process is about, what the next cycle is about, and so that progressively we can identify the way forward. Jason Williams, NDC and LT-LEDs, LT-LEDs meaning long-term, low emission development strategies, regional specialist at the RCC Caribbean. Dear Jason, the floor is yours.
Hello, hi, good day, and thank you, Virginia. As Virginia mentioned, I'm attached to the RCC, the UNFCCC RCC Caribbean, based in St. George's, Grenada. My role is the NDC and LT-LEDs regional specialist. I believe the speakers before me did a very good job in introducing the topic of NDCs, and this is good. I'll just complement it with some additional information now. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So I'd like to start my presentation just recapping the Paris Agreement, and we've heard quite a bit about the Paris Agreement during today's webinar. So the Paris Agreement has the three main goals: the goal on mitigation, which is keeping temperature increased to well below 2 degrees Celsius, while making efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and this is above pre-industrial levels. We have the goal on adaptation, so it's looking at increasing the ability to adapt and foster resilience. And we also have the goal on financial flows, consistent again with the pathway to low GHG emissions and resilient development. And how does this interact with the ambition cycle? So the countries, as we've heard today, they developed what are known as the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. And this is how the countries communicate how their intentions or their efforts to align with the Paris Agreement goals, to respond to those three goals that we mentioned before. So it's not necessarily only the NDCs, because we also heard about the national adaptation plans, and we also heard about the long-term low emission development strategies, which also has goals as well. So the countries come up with these goals, and it's not just only about coming up with the goals, it's also implementing actions to then mm, to help meet these goals. So we have the planning, where we come up with the goals, where the countries come up with the goals, then we move on to the implementation. And when we speak about implementation, we're looking at the different areas, so mitigation, adaptation, and again, means of implementation. So moving on from the implementation, we then go into a process of tracking it. So like, how are the countries doing in terms of those actions that they would have committed to, and their implementation efforts? So in the tracking part, we look at the transparency of the national actions, and that leads us to the enhanced transparency framework. So under the enhanced transparency framework, the countries are required to submit biennial update reports, which are due now every 2 years. The first one is due by the end of this year, so December 2024. And hand in hand with the enhanced transparency framework, we have the global stocktake. So the global stocktake basically looks at collectively where countries are in terms of meeting those goals, those Paris Agreement goals. And through this tracking mechanisms, the enhanced transparency framework and the global stocktake, that then allows countries, through the feedback of those processes, the opportunity to increase their ambition. So looking at increasing ambition and increasing those ambitions when developing their subsequent plans. And NDCs, might have mentioned earlier, but they're due every 5 years. The first one was communicated in 2020. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Okay, great. So looking in more detail at the results of the global stocktake, we mentioned earlier that the global stocktake is like looking at the collective efforts of countries in reaching in responding to the Paris Agreement. So there, there, we can look at the mitigation, and we can look at the adaptation. Let's look at first at the mitigation. So significant collective progress towards the Paris Agreement temperature goal has been made. So from an expected increase of 4 degrees Celsius to now to an increase in the range of 2.1 to 2.8 degrees Celsius. So that 4 degrees Celsius increase that I spoke about, that was a prediction prior to Paris Agreement. Right? So with the current NDCs, we're on a track to decrease emissions by roughly 2% annually by 2030, and this is again compared to 2019. But what is really needed for us to be in line with that 1.5 degrees temperature goal, the reductions in global GHG emissions has to be around 43% by 2030 and 60% by 2035 relative to the 2019 levels, right? And this would allow us to help to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So the GST decision also notes with concern the implementation gap. So it's not only about the communications in the NDCs, but what are the policies that are developed at the domestic levels, and what is the actual implementation of these actions towards reaching the goals. So this gap has been emphasized and noted with concern. On to adaptation, again in the GST. In adaptation, planning and implementation efforts being undertaken by parties towards enhancing adaptive capacity is taken note of. This is referencing the national adaptation plans and the implementation on the ground. It also emphasizes the strengthening of resilience and reducing vulnerability that will be required, especially in developing countries. Significant challenges do exist for developing country parties in accessing finance for implementing their national adaptation plans. And again, it also notes the gaps in implementation of support for and collective assessment of the adequacy and effectiveness of adaptation, which is highlighted in the adaptation section. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so looking at the GST outcome, the first GST outcome was delivered last year in 2023. It's not a 1-year process. It's due every 5 years, and during this time period, during this period, there's many opportunities for feedback. So there are technical dialogues, there are submissions from parties. There's also technical dialogues, and other stakeholders contribute information. So looking at the goal stocktake, it has 4 main sections. So there's a section on context and cross-cutting. There's a section on the collective progress and informing action and support. Within this section, there are subsections. So again, we see a subsection on mitigation, which is again looking at the 1.5 degrees temperature goal and keeping it in reach. We're looking at implementing actions relating to transitioning away from fossil fuels, also tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency by 2030. There's also, within that section, also efforts on transitioning to sustainable consumption and production. There's a subsection on adaptation, which looks at incremental, multi-sectoral, and transformational actions. Here we see elements of early warning systems. We see elements also of the national adaptation plans and the adaptation communications. There's a third subsection on means of implementation, which is looking at technology transfer. It also looks at finance, and it looks at capacity building. There's a subsection on loss and damage, so looking to avert and minimize loss and damage, and also looking at the data requirements that feed into this process that is necessary to guide this process. There's a section on response measures, where we look at advancing just transitions. There's a third section on the overall outcome, the GST outcome on international cooperation, and there's also a section on guidance on the way forward. So basically mainstreaming the GST outcomes, looking at dialogues on different areas, for example, the GST on finance, mountains, and children. It also looks at calls for a revision of the NDCs and the long-term strategies, and also it does allude also to the submission of the biennial transparency reports, which I mentioned is due by the end of the year. The decision also notes the capacity constraints of developing country parties and calls on the international community as well to provide support to developing countries in developing and implementing their NDCs. Next slide, please. So there's some guidance. So what is required of the NDCs based on the GST guidance? So specifically in the NDCs, the outcomes of the GST request the developed country parties to continue to take lead by undertaking economy-wide and absolute emission reduction targets, while for the developing country parties, they're encouraged to enhance mitigation actions, and with time also to move towards these economy-wide targets. Specifically, it referred back to previous decisions on this next round of NDCs. So stemming from the Paris Agreement and onwards, it looks at the importance of linking NDCs and LT-LEDs and encourages countries to align their NDCs with those long-term low emission development strategies. It looks also at the submission of new NDCs, which is due in 2025, and this is mandatory for all, and this is the first time that there will be a compliance requirement. On the end date for the next NDC, this encourages the next NDCs to have an end date of 2035. So this point here is an encouragement. The other points that's there are mandatory points. So by a progression also beyond the party's current NDCs, so reflecting the highest possible ambition. Looking at the countries in their next NDCs should also provide information on clarity, transparency, and understanding, and there's some specific guidance on that. The next NDCs again should adopt accounting approaches. Again, this is a mandatory requirement. And provide information on how the NDCs has been informed by the GST outcomes. So all what we looked at on the previous slides, the countries are now required to communicate in their next NDCs how those GST outcomes would have informed their next NDCs. The next round of NDCs are due by 10th of February 2025. So that's 9 to 12 months before CMA7, so COP25, COP 2025, the COP in the year 2025. So the NDCs are due by the 10th of February 2025. So the decision also notes again the capacity challenges for the least developed countries, as well as the small island developing states, relating to preparing and communicating their NDCs. And it also calls for support for the developing countries, as I mentioned in the previous slide, in general, in preparing and implementing their next round of NDCs. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide. So what the NDC 3.0 should include. So the UNFCCC, in collaboration with implementing and developing partners, came up with this NDC 3.2 support framework that's on the screen. It basically tells us what the NDCs should be and how it is to be developed. So clearly follow up on the GST, as we mentioned earlier. It should be aligned to the 1.5 Paris temperature goal. It should consider elements of resilience and adaptation. It should also include a just transition, so ensure that there is a just and equitable transition and leaving no one behind. It will also look at unlocking the ambition on finance, so integrating finance considerations across sectoral approaches. We also look at including international cooperation, so engagement in Article 6, for example, and South-South corporations. How it should be developed. So countries should take ownership of the NDCs 3.0, should involve a whole of society approach. It should be implementation ready, act as transformation plans, backed by complementary legislation and policy roadmaps. It should also consider and include elements of technology and capacity needs. And finally, should be technically sound. So following all the decisions and everything that the parties would have agreed to, all of this needs to be included in the NDC 3.0, applying the information and clarity, transparency, and understanding, as I mentioned before. So that, I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. But thank you, and I'd like to hand back over to Virginia and Roxana.
Thank you so much, Jason, for such a comprehensive presentation. I think it's very informative in the sense that makes us realize all that is going on, in our peers in environment, whether it's climate or environment ministry, that they're dealing with this process. It is a complex process, and as I said, not led by tourism, but we do need to be aware of it, colleagues. It is very important. And while we will not be able to maybe take part in all of the components of the process that Jason has presented, we need to be aware of the key touch points for our sector. And one key touch point, and why we are organizing this webinar today, is the review of the NDCs. You're probably scared now, having seen deadline 10th of February, like, ooh, we're not going to make it. Don't worry. I mean, that's the deadline, of course. All the countries have different realities. And what we know is that certainly by COP30 in Brazil, Belém, at the end of next year, countries are certainly willing to have something to present. So probably this process has already started in all of your countries. Probably no, certainly. Which means that, hopefully you are already preparing your questions for the interactive part, where, we can have a close discussion, maybe guide you on what steps you could take to investigate a bit what's the status and, explore the opportunities. But before we do that, it's important that we also learn a bit about our other key element of the Paris Agreement, which is what connects with carbon markets. It is the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that has been under discussion or negotiation. I don't know, Patrick, what's the exact word I should be using, since actually the Paris itself was launched. You can imagine the complexity to have all the countries of the world agreeing on how carbon markets are going to function. But I would say we're close to the finish line, and it's also bringing us an opportunity, especially to find opportunities to cooperate to support implementing NDC achievement in connection to, finance. So Patrick Munyanesa, Article 6 and Carbon Pricing Specialist at the RCC Caribbean of UNFCCC. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And yeah, I will present now. It's a proposition of a tool that is available for countries. And my colleague Jason brilliantly presented on the NDC process. And one of the key aspects when we discuss about NDCs, it's financing. From the global stock take that my colleague mentioned just before, there is a gap of close to $6 trillion US dollars for NDC achievement, and we are talking about the second NDCs that are just ending at the end of this year. So this is a massive financial need. And at the beginning as well, Virginia may have mentioned about different policies and instruments that countries have at their disposal for mobilizing resources. So we have constellation of economic instruments that can be used for the countries to achieve their NDCs. And today we will focus on one particular instrument that is lined up in the Paris Agreement. It's the Article 6, as Virginia mentioned at the beginning. I will start with the first slide, which is to recall the urgency of climate change. So it is happening, and here in the Caribbean, particularly here in the Caribbean, for our countries, we are in the forefront of the impacts of climate change, and the science is clear. So we have to act now. And we all know the sources of or the cause of the climate change, which is primarily by burning fossil fuel. And this instrument that I'm going to propose in the next couple of minutes will provide us an option to reduce emissions while allowing the trading of carbon credits. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, the impacts of the climate change are obvious, and here in the region, we are at the forefront. We experience hurricane. I'm sitting here in Grenada, for instance, Hurricane Beryl almost destroyed, for instance, one of our islands here. And as it was mentioned at the beginning, tourism sector is one of the most affected sectors in our region. So what is Article 6 of the Paris Agreement? First, it's worth mentioning that within the text of the Paris Agreement, Article 6 is the only section that mentions the private sector. So within the whole text of the Paris Agreement, Article 6 is the only section that will mention the private sector. So what is this Article 6 and what it proposes to us? So the Article 6 lays down the foundation for cooperative approaches among countries to achieve their NDCs and increase ambition in their targets. So in the heart of Article 6, we have the sustainable development, poverty eradication, and we have the environmental integrity. So Article 6 will promote not only regional, but international cooperation for ambition in climate action. So it provides us 3 tools that we'll talk in the next slides. And it's voluntary. This is very important to mention as well. So countries may voluntarily choose to use instruments under the Article 6 to achieve collaboratively their NDCs. Next slide, please. So what are the 3 instruments that Article 6 proposes us to cooperate and achieve collaboratively NDCs? So we have two instruments that are market-based, and as Regina mentioned, they're integrated into the global concept of carbon markets. And we have an instrument that is not related to trading of carbon credit units. So the first of the market-based instrument under Article 6, it is called Article 6.2. And this is achieved through a bilateral agreement between two countries, and it will allow the trading of carbon credits, which we call ITMOs, and I will get back into these units in the next slides. So it will allow the trading of carbon credit unit between one country to another. We have also under the market segment, if you can put that way, another mechanism, which is Article 6.4, which provides a framework for international carbon market. And this is centralized mechanism that allow the transfer of units from a buyer country or to other buyers that may be companies or other organizations. So this mechanism will replace, maybe some of you may be aware of the previous mechanism, the clean development mechanism. So this instrument replaces the CDM. And one other important element of the Article 6, which is the third instrument, and which does not include the trading of credits, it's the Article 6.8, or the non-market approaches, as we call it. So this is a web-based platform where countries can, it is a repository of support that is available for adaptation, mitigation, and countries can basically visualize which support is available and for which sector. It is not yet fully operational. Our colleagues in Bonn are still working on these instruments. The platform is available, and they're still integrating some of the actions based on different sectors, such agriculture, and hopefully in the future, we will have a segment specific for the tourism sector. So next slide, please. So how Article 6 fits in the generic concept of carbon markets. But before we go there, let's take a step back and mention a little bit what the carbon credits are. So carbon credits are one tool to reduce greenhouse gases emissions. So we have other tools, we have other economic tools, as we mentioned. And here we have an investment in a project that reduce greenhouse gases emission to counterpart emission produced by a buyer. And the buyer can be an organization, can be an individual, and we will look into different carbon market types, or it can be a country as well for the NDC achievement. And this project will sell carbon credits to individual and organizations so they can offset their emissions. And as we mentioned, in the Article 6 market, the countries can use these emissions that were achieved in one country for their NDC targets. And depending on the project type, there may be additional societal benefits such as health, equity, economic, job creation, so on and so forth. So it's worth mentioning that these carbon credits are financial instruments where the buyer pays for another company or country to reduce its greenhouse emissions. So in general terms, we have two types of carbon markets. So voluntary carbon market and compliance market. And Article 6 will propose a third category of carbon markets, and we'll see the differences. For the voluntary market, it is used in general for compensating emissions as part of net zero and climate neutral targets. So these are self-set targets that companies, they will self-set. And the buyers are usually corporates and individuals. And we have units which are voluntary credits and Article 6.4 mitigation contribution units. And again, here these credits are generated from self-regulation and codes of best practices. For the compliance segment of the market, this can be used for achieving NDCs at domestic level. And here the motivation is the compliance with a mandated pricing instrument, such as carbon taxes or emission trading systems. So the buyers will be the compliance entities that are under, for instance, this emission trading system, or for the companies that will have to comply with a certain carbon tax. And the units are emission allowance or offset credits. And as I mentioned, this can be at domestic level, at national level, or it can be at a certain sector within a jurisdiction. And then we have the Article 6 market, which is in general terms for the NDC achievement. And as we mentioned in the beginning, it allows countries to achieve their NDC cooperatively. And the beauty of Article 6 market is that the units can be used in the previous market that I mentioned, voluntary market and the compliance markets. And the motivation under this market is to increase the NDC ambition and to allow countries some flexibility in meeting their NDC targets. In generic terms, the buyers are parties of the convention, and the units, the carbon credits, they are referred as international transferred mitigation outcomes. ITMOs, and we have international oversight. We have rules that have been they're in place that will set how these carbon credits are generated. Next slide, please. So what type of activities that we can have under Article 6? We can have removals that are credits that are generated to improve the impact of past emissions. If we look at the past generation of international carbon markets, usually it's 5% of the market. And removal credits are based on the project that directly remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, such as planting trees or some technology-based techniques. For instance, we have the carbon capture and storage. And from the emission reduction side, we have projects that focus on avoiding or reducing atmospheric emission of carbon dioxide, and usually looking at information from the previous international carbon market, 82% of the credits are generated under this segment. And buyers of these types and offset credits for preventing future emissions. And here we have projects such as protecting the forests. We have the renewable energy project that it was mentioned before, energy efficiency programs. We can have e-mobility programs. We can have the transition, as we mentioned, to the renewable energy. And it is important as well that under next slide, please. That under the third mechanism under Article 6, the Article 6.8, and this is what is important, there is no trading of carbon credits. Next slide, please. So we can move to the next slide. So the key components of Article 6, as we mentioned, in the heart of Article 6 is to allow countries to more flexibility in achieving their NDCs. There is an ambition element into into Article 6, and to help as well achieve this emission reduction at a very cost-effective manner. And it is important to mention as well that there is a sustainable development mechanism. There is a sustainable development tool that was approved just 2 weeks ago. And this sustainable development tool is to ensure that activities that are implemented under Article 6 will uphold the principle of do not harm, or will foster the sustainable development. Next slide, please. And as it was mentioned at the beginning, Article 6, it has been one of the most contentious aspects in the history of COPs. And next, please. Since its inception at COP21 with the Paris Agreement, we have had COPs where negotiators were not able to agree in some elements. For instance, the rule book of the Article 6. So it took a number of COPs till 2021 at COP26 in Glasgow, we had the first version of the rule book of Article 6. And since Glasgow, some of the elements are still under discussions. Technical elements, for instance, related to authorization of these units, when these units are generated, which use we can provide to them. For instance, going to COP 2029, elements related, for instance, to the first transfer and authorization of the units, they will still be under discuss. It is worth mentioning, although that we don't have a fully operational Article 6 at this point, particularly under the bilateral agreement under Article 6.2, we have had some pilots being implemented. And because Article 6.2 is a bilateral, it's a more decentralized mechanism, we have countries entering into agreements for carbon credits trading. And at the beginning of this year, we had the first transfer of ITMOs from one country to another, from Thailand to Switzerland. So there are projects already ongoing in the region. For instance, we have an Article 6 agreement, bilateral agreement between Dominica and Switzerland under an e-mobility program. And just before I finalized, why this is important for the tourism sector, as it was mentioned at the beginning, the tourism sector is critical to our economies here in the Caribbean, and these instruments will allow opportunities for the tourism industry to present some of the action. It was mentioned during the presentation on tourism action within the NDCs that we have some mitigation related instruments in the current NDCs, some specific actions that are related, for instance, for renewable energy. It was mentioned as well, energy efficiency measures and waste to energy. So there are opportunities from tourism operators to present projects or specific action that can allow the trading of ITMOs. So with this presentation, I will end here, and I'll get back to you, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Super interesting, super technical, but you transported it in a very nice manner. Much appreciated. Also, highlighting at the end why it's important for tourism. I think this is key for us, especially because we have seen that most of the NDCs mention tourism, but from a vulnerability point of view, And the second on the list is adaptation point of view. Obvious reasons, nobody's going to object to that. But if we want to jump in on this upcoming Article 6, we have to think about mitigation. And that's where at least the references now are not as strong, not as many. So it's also a way of, broadening our thinking by looking at a longer term opportunity that will be brought to us through Article 6 if we are all also connecting or exploring the opportunity to connect, mitigation actions.